Welcome everyone to Straight Talk for tonight's online community forum. My name is Rob Huff. I am the Director of Advocacy and Communications for Metropolitan Development Council. I'm here tonight because our wonderful CEO and President of MDC is under the weather. We all wish her well and hope that she has the opportunity to watch this later. It's now my privilege to welcome Amanda Westbrook to tonight's Straight Talk. She will serve as a facilitator for tonight's conversation.
Thank you, Rob. Tonight's conversation is the 37th in a series of discussions started last year. We hold weekly discussions around important topics impacting our communities in Tacoma and Pierce County.
Tonight's conversation, tonight we will talk about the off-ramp from the current eviction moratorium in Washington State, which is currently scheduled to end on March 31st. We will focus on what is likely to happen next and what people can do if their housing is at risk this month. The most important message that we want to convey to everyone throughout tonight's program and this whole series of conversations is that there is hope for our community.
Well said, Rob. We would like to take a moment to acknowledge that this meeting is being conducted on the indigenous lands of the Puyallup people. We gratefully acknowledge that we rest on the traditional lands of the Puyallup people, where they make their home and speak the Lushootseed language. Throughout today's conversation, you can submit questions to be addressed by our speakers using the Q&A function in Zoom. We cannot promise that we'll have time to consider every question, but we'll make our best effort to get through in the allotted time. Now I would like to introduce our esteemed guest for tonight's discussion. Rachael Myers is the Executive Director of the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance. Welcome, Rachael.
Thanks, Amanda. It's good to be here.
It's great to have you here. And we want to welcome back Laurie Davenport. She is an attorney working for Tacoma Pro Bono. Laurie, welcome back, my dear.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you for having me back. Full disclosure, I am not an attorney, but I have been working with Tacoma Pro Bono for 20 years now.
That's
so
okay. You can.
I know something.
You can play one for this podcast. How's that?
All right. Yeah, I play one at work. How about that?
How's that? Okay. So let's open up tonight's conversation as we always do. I would like to ask first off, how everyone is doing tonight. And when I ask that question, what I really mean is, where are you in your heart? And for this question, I'm not going to call on who should go first. I'm going to let the spirit inside of you dictate when you want to jump in.
Well, I'm happy to jump in. And thank you, Amanda. I love that you ask this question every week. It's really important to kind of keep in touch with our own and our colleagues and our friends and our community's humanity through all of this, because it's been a hard year. So that kind of sums up how I am feeling and where I am in my heart. It has been a long and difficult year. I think, like many people, I'm realizing that I'm thinking back to the beginning of the pandemic, which, again, just about a year ago, that seems significant, and how I felt then and how different things feel now, and yet how not different they feel in other ways. Realizing that with the sun coming out a little bit this week and, vaccines coming out in our communities, I'm feeling a glimmer of hope that I didn't feel. Last year at this time, was just a lot of fear. I'm not washing my mail with bleach before it comes in my house. We know a lot more about how this is transmitted. So I'm really grateful to have, as exhausting as this year has been, I'm grateful to have a lot less uncertainty than we had a year ago. And I am really committed. I'm also really deeply in my heart feeling committed to making sure that the potential wave of evictions and homelessness does not happen in our state. And I'm convinced that we can prevent that.
I loved your comment about the bleach. I had some similar thoughts as well. So Rachel, thank you for weighing in on that.
I think I'm feeling, I have to say I'm feeling energized, kind of energized and nervous and kind of on, I don't know, on pins and needles in a way. I think this has been a really long haul. It feels like, we were talking about it this morning at our staff meeting. It feels like we're building a spaceship and we're not sure where it's going, and it's flying already, and we're still trying to figure out how to put it together. It's just getting more and more and more like that. And like I've been hearing this phrase, I think Rahm Emanuel said it, but somebody else said it before. You can't let a good crisis go to waste. This kind of big stuff, when it happens, it's a chance for big change. It's a chance to do really good stuff. So I'm firmly convinced that we can get through this end of the moratorium thing with some positive changes in place and let it happen in a way that doesn't hurt people, that gives us something we didn't have before. So that's I'm feeling like I'm sitting here and like my stomach is kind of tight. It's because I'm trying to be as creative as possible and take advantage of as much as possible. So that's where I am.
I love that. I have that same tight stomach as well internally. Rob, you are the Director of Advocacy and Communication for MDC. And those slim shoulders carry a lot of weight. So I'm going to ask you to check in with us today as well.
Sure. Thanks, Amanda. What I'm noticing as we get into the beginning of March here is just the passage of time, the fact that it feels like it's been a bit of a time warp that we've gone through. And I know there was a lot of joking last year, 3-4 months into this pandemic, about the fact that it felt in a lot of ways like March never ended. It feels even odder that March is back. I'm hopeful that this March has more of a silver lining, I think, than a year ago. Just like Rachel said, there's less of that fear, I think. We know more about where we're at. But it's my hope that with the spring, we also can see some silver linings and some good outcomes for people who are concerned about their housing as this eviction moratorium comes to an end.
Yeah, well said, Rob, well said. So the next 3 questions, Rachel, I'm going to put you on the Zoom hot seat. And Laurie, you get to just kind of relax and listen here for a bit. But your turn's coming, so don't get too relaxed, okay? Rachel, let's get started tonight. Can you outline what we know about the number of renters across Washington who continue to struggle to be able to pay their rent? I'm looking for numbers, and also what is the size of the problem, so we get a pretty good snapshot where we are, as you said, almost a year later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, happy to do that. Well, what we know is that there are a lot of families and individuals impacted, by health issues, of course, but also by the economic impacts of COVID-19, job losses, income losses, reductions in hours, and people are really, really struggling. The best data that we have comes from the U.S. Census Bureau. They're doing a regular survey of folks in every state in the country. It's called the Pulse Household Survey, or something similar. There might be another word in there. And the data isn't perfect, but it does tell us a lot. And I just want to highlight the not perfect nature of the data. because there's some important pieces of information we're missing. So for example, it shows us how people are faring, and it breaks it down by race and ethnicity. But it doesn't disaggregate among Asian and Pacific Islanders, for example. There's one big category of folks who are considered Asian American. And if it did disaggregate by Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, I think we would see a lot more impacts for Pacific Islander communities. Even if it disaggregated among Asian American communities, I think it's hiding some disparate impacts. It also doesn't include any specific data about how Native Americans are doing. Native Americans are included in one big category of biracial, multiracial, and other. So again, data is not perfect, but we do know that it is the best data we have as far as getting a sense of the scale of the problem. The most recent data set came out just about a week ago, and it showed that in the first half of February, there were 135,000 or so renters who were in households who were not caught up on rent statewide. And that's about 10% of everybody that was surveyed. The previous data set showed about 190,000 people in households who were not caught up on rent, so about 12% of people. And it often shows that people of color, particularly Black households and Latinx households, are faring worse and are more likely to be behind on rent. The other thing that data set shows us is for people who are caught up on rent, people are making a lot of decisions in order to pay their rent, and they're using unsustainable means to do that. So we know in the last data set that there were over 300,000 people in households who were caught up on rent, but had been using savings or borrowing from friends or family or payday lenders or selling assets in order to meet their basic spending needs. So even for folks who are caught up on rent, those kinds of ways to keep up cannot last forever.
That is an incredibly sobering picture that you just painted. And we're going to talk about that phrase, the unsustainable funds, here later on, because Rob and I were talking about when you cannot pay your rent because of the pandemic, there are other things you cannot pay as well. Mm-hmm. And how do we include those in the picture as we make that off ramp? But I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. Mm-hmm. So Rachel, I know there's a lot of work is underway in Olympia to pass legislation that will help minimize the impact of the eviction moratorium coming to an end here. What is the high-level overview of what's being proposed to help the situation?
Yeah, happy to talk through briefly the primary bills that are focused on that. Before I do, though, I did just want to note that there is talk happening at the state level about potentially extending the moratorium for some amount of time, just to at least make sure that whatever rent assistance we have from the federal government, the State Department of Commerce is just rolling out the funding from the legislation that passed in December. There's another bill in Congress that would create another new stream of rental assistance funding, and it's just not possible to get that up and running fast enough to serve everybody by the end of March when the moratorium is scheduled to end. So that conversation about some kind of bridge for the moratorium extension is underway. We don't know exactly how that'll play out, but the conversation is happening. There's also an effort at the federal level to extend the federal eviction moratorium beyond the March 31st date. And you may know that, and we're fortunate in Washington, our moratorium is much stronger than the federal moratorium. And in other states who only rely on the federal moratorium, a lot of evictions are continuing to happen, and we haven't seen that at that level here. But there are also efforts to not just extend it, but to strengthen it. So there may be some other hope on the horizon that would protect tenants, in addition to this legislation that I'll talk about here. So the three bills that we're focusing on and that we really consider the off-ramp to the eviction moratorium are Senate Bill 5160, House Bill 1277, and House Bill 1236. And these are all fairly complex pieces of legislation that are changing and being amended and have been amended multiple times. So I won't go into all the details, but at a real high level, 5160, sponsored by Senator Patty Kuderer, does a number of things, a number of really important things. It prevents late fees from being levied during the public health emergency. So the current eviction moratorium prevents late fees. It just extends that into state law. It takes some steps to ensure that people who have fallen behind on their rent during the eviction moratorium aren't prevented because of that, that record, that history from renting places, from renting homes in the future. It requires landlords to offer tenants reasonable repayment plans that are based on their personal circumstances. It creates a 2-year statewide eviction resolution program to help tenants and landlords kind of negotiate and figure out a plan to get that rent paid back. And it requires that landlords notify tenants of this option before any eviction proceeding can start. And then really importantly, it provides a right to counsel. So it provides tenants who are facing eviction proceedings in court with a lawyer to support them. Currently, almost every landlord has an attorney representing them in court, and almost every tenant represents themselves. So the tenant is literally standing in court side by side with their landlord's attorney, and the outcomes aren't very good in that case, as you can imagine. And in places where the right to counsel exists, in New York City, for example, 86% of tenants who are represented by counsel end up remaining in their homes and don't have to move. So that's a really important piece of the bill. So that's 5160. 1277, that's House Bill 1277, sponsored by Representative Ormsby, creates a permanent state rental assistance program funded with a $100 document recording fee. It would also fund permanent supportive housing, operations and services, and it puts some money into the Landlord Mitigation Fund, which is a fund that was created several years ago to provide some sort of cushion for landlords. It was created when we passed source of income discrimination protections, so that landlords, if their units were damaged and they couldn't get payment for that from deposits, there's a fund at the state level that they can apply to be made whole. I think that's all I will, and the majority of those funding would be used for rental assistance, but could also be used for other eviction prevention related activities. And then the third bill is House Bill 1236, sponsored by Representative Nicole Macri. And that's a bill that we call Just Cause. So currently in most places in Washington state, landlords can end a tenancy and make someone move for no reason at all. They don't have to even give a reason. And this can hide discrimination and retaliation. So it really undermines our fair housing protections. This would not prevent landlords from ending a tenancy because someone broke a rule or violated the lease or didn't pay their rent, outside of these other protections in 5160, but it enumerates the reasons that a landlord has for making someone move and for ending a tenancy. Things like they want to move into the unit themselves or move an immediate family member in, they're selling the unit, they just can't do it for no reason at all. And that's really important because that will help us assure that any rental assistance funds that we receive or that we have will actually preserve the tenancy. Otherwise, we could be, paying people's back rent, and the landlords could turn around and evict them anyway. And that kind of means that, we're achieving one half of the goal, which is making landlords whole, but we're not achieving the other half of the goal, which is keeping people in their homes. So that's House Bill 1236.
So Rachel, of these three bills, 5160, 1277, 1236, do you get a sense of which one is more likely to get through the process and which one will be, or which ones will be a bigger challenge?
Yeah, I mean, they're all a big lift. The legislature, and especially in a remote session, there's a lot of opportunities for really good bills, to get stalled or to be killed in the process. Fortunately, the legislature is really focused on housing. I think that we have all been talking for a year. We've had a housing crisis long before the pandemic, and affordable housing and efforts to end homelessness have been more and more each year a priority for the legislature. And I think that is true to a greater extent than ever this year. I will say that I think 1277, that creates rental assistance. Rental assistance is something that landlords advocates and tenant advocates all kind of agree is a key part of the solution. Surprisingly, we haven't seen a lot of active support from the landlord associations for this bill, but again, I think everybody knows that this is an important part of the solution for both making landlords whole and protecting tenants. Whereas the landlord associations, the private market landlords are not supporting 1236 and 5160. So there's active opposition to those bills. Whenever there's active opposition, it's harder to get things done. We're hopeful that all three will pass, and we're in constant conversation and negotiations with all of the sort of interested parties. So there's just, we're trying to find something that'll work for everyone. Our priority is, of course, is preventing people from losing their homes. So they've all got hurdles, they've all got uphill battles, and they all have a path to becoming law.
Absolutely. So Miss Laurie, as you were sitting there, and I love the look on your face because you were just checking off all those bills, and I could see the thought bubbles happening there. So Laurie, what are some of the resources that you are offering at Tacoma Pro Bono to help renters retain their housing and also negotiate repayment plans to avoid eviction once the moratorium ends?
So we have actually for quite a while been working on a relationship with Tacoma Pro Bono and Center for Dialogue and Resolution, which ultimately kind of bore fruit with the eviction resolution program. And so we're one of the pilot counties for the eviction resolution program, which is if 5160 passes and becomes law, that's just going to be what we do, which is great. The problem with it is that it's confusing for people. Like, okay, I can make a payment plan, great. How do I tie that in with rental assistance? Who do I talk to? How do I talk to my landlord? How do I talk to my tenant? Can I get legal help? There's no sense that, even though we've been working on it for a long time, there's no sense that, okay, here's where I go, here's what I do. It's all there. Fortunately, I think we're probably going to be tying it together better, because as of today, rental assistance is available in Pierce County. The landlord portal right now is the one that's open, and that's important. Before the last round of rental assistance, landlords couldn't apply, and that just kind of made it really tough, because landlords would want to be able to help a tenant, but the tenant wouldn't be responding because they'd be afraid they were just going to be threatened or whatever. And now we've got that in place, so the landlord can register and they can get their information in there. It makes it a lot easier for the tenant to then go in and apply for rental assistance. So that is happening, and next Monday, March 8th, tenants will be able to go in and apply. My understanding is that there's enough money flowing through this process, like Rachael was mentioning, that we really could take care of just about all the rent that's owing. I mean, it's kind of unbelievable if people will apply for it, if they'll work on payment plans. So the big thing we want to tell people, obviously, is get in touch with us. Whichever door you go through, we're working with the county, we're working with the Center for Dialogue and Resolution, we're working with Fair Housing. Doesn't matter who you contact, you will get to the right place. So in terms of what Tacoma Pro Bono specifically offers, we're here both to be participant in the eviction resolution program, in which case we're working directly with Center for Dialogue and Resolution. We're sharing information back and forth. They're getting people in for initial consultations with landlords and tenants. If things aren't working out, they contact us. If people need, they have an attorney sitting with them in the mediation, we can do that. So that's all there. And people can get into that by contacting us directly or by contacting them directly. That's great. And with the rental assistance in the mix now, I think we can really get somewhere with that. We also are here for eviction defense. And this afternoon when I left the office, there was a Zoom hearing going on in the cubicle next to me. We're getting really busy. There's a lot going on. As you know, the 60-day notice that is allowed under the eviction moratorium right now, that allows landlords to evict people if they're planning to move in or planning to sell the property, is being sometimes misused. And So we're seeing quite a few of those, and for quite a few of those, we have to go to court. Plus a lot of other really strange stuff going on because it's a strange time. So eviction defense is pretty interesting right now. But we're doing a lot of that. We have more than 2 attorneys now on staff doing eviction hearings, and it's ramping up. So, and we're here for any kind of landlord-tenant problem. I mean, there's a lot that we weren't able to address in the past. Like, I appreciate Rachel mentioning that like before this happened, it wasn't like everything was perfect and it was great. We don't have enough housing. We have an enormous housing crisis. Tenants don't have enough protections. It has not been a good situation. So like I say, this is maybe an opportunity to do something about some of that. But there are other things we can address because funding has been coming into us that we never had before. And landlords can evict people for nuisance, for causing problems, and some of that's okay and some of it's not okay. So we're here to take any kind of legal issue.
All right. Well, I don't know if you saw that or not, but my computer evicted me and it totally shut down.
That's called an ejectment, right?
Oh, that
passenger
was
ejector seat.
It was. And so I am quite convinced that by the look on Rob's face, you answered that beautifully. Hang on 1 second. Let me take the echo off here. Thank you, Rob, for that. Boy, my goodness.
You're welcome.
Okay, so this next question, I'm going to start with Rachael first and then Laurie. Please jump in as you feel the need. With time under the moratorium running out so quickly, what are the chances that the governor will agree to extend that moratorium, as we were talking about, perhaps a little bit longer to allow legislation to get passed and go into effect?
I think Rachel explained that really well, and I'm hearing everybody we talk to, question gets asked all the time. They say, well, we don't really know, but the best information we have is it probably will be extended to June 1st. So we'll get an extra couple of months to try to put some of the stuff in place.
And Rachel, what are your thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, sorry for jumping ahead before. Yeah, I mean, I think the governor, through his actions all of last year has shown that preventing people from losing their homes is a huge priority. So I feel the same way. I think it's quite likely that he will extend it. There may or may not be some changes or adjustments to it. But I think that, like I said, it's going to take some time for these laws to get passed and put into place, and for the rental assistance funding that we've just received and that we hope is on the horizon to actually reach people in communities. It's a lot of work for service providers like MDC, to turn this around and to meet people's needs. I think it's another piece of really good news that our governor has really been following the science in how he's responded to the pandemic. And one of the things that we know, there's some pretty good data now, is that evictions lead to greater instances of COVID-19 infections, or however the right way to say that is, because what happens is that people either have to go to a shelter or live in a car or live in a tent and then access some other kind of, crowded setting to get food and to get all of those other things, or they double up with another family. And so it brings people into more contact with more other people. And so even if he weren't, and I believe he does, want to protect people and keep people in their homes because that's the right thing to do. And having a home is important for so many reasons. I think he also doesn't want to see, the pandemic extended, and places that didn't implement a strong eviction moratorium saw some direct impacts on the number of COVID-19 cases.
Something he said that continues to ring in my brain during one of his press conferences. He said, "I'm not going to let Washingtonians fall off the cliff." And I thought that was such a human thing to say for a man who is busy trying to build, as you said, Laurie, the spaceship as we go. And that's a big thing to say as well, because it implies that there's going to be something there to catch you. So with that in mind, the next question is, for both of you, and maybe Rachel, you can weigh in on more of a state level, and maybe Laurie, you more of a Tacoma Pierce County level, in the sense of how much do we think the new rental assistance dollars flowing in will help keep people housed?
What I have, excuse me, what I have heard is that if we can get people into payment plans, if we can get mediation working, if we can get people the help, if just get them to apply, get them to come in. I mean, the issue is people are, because there's a moratorium, it gets involved with this whole issue of, okay, I got to make choices. I don't have a job. I have to buy food. I'm not going to pay my rent. I know landlords are thinking, and maybe some of this is going on as well. Well, this is a chance for me not to have to pay rent. I'm just going to write it out. A lot of people are just scared, and they just aren't going to come forward until it actually happens to them and they get the notice. This is an opportunity to just not have to go through all that stuff. It's really important. If people will start applying, call us, contact us, it doesn't have to happen like that, and it really will preserve housing. So right now we've got this period of time, at least 1 month, maybe 3 months, and we can, I think we really can. There will be problems, there will be issues, there will be crowded court schedules, but we really can keep the tsunami that everybody is expecting from happening.
What would you add to that, Rachel?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, I think that it's true that the rent assistance on its own, even though, we're seeing some pretty big numbers, the state, did spend about 130, I believe, million on rent assistance last year, mostly from federal CARES Act funding. With this last, package that was passed in Congress in December, Washington State got over 500 million. The new bill, or the bill that is moving through Congress right now, will have about probably another similar amount. So we may get another 500 or so million dollars. And the Department of Commerce has estimated that at a very conservative level, what we need is $100 million a month. And that's, all the way back to March, and then lasting for some time, because we know the economy, I'm lucky, my job hasn't been changed. I have my income, I'm able to work from home. But the people who are already struggling are also the same people who are more likely to lose jobs working in the service sector, in those kinds of positions. And for those folks, the economy is not going to come back as quickly. You hear this talk about a K-shaped recovery, or a K-shaped, maybe not recovery is the right word, but, K-shaped impact, where, people who were doing pretty well kind of bounce back quickly, but people who are already struggling take a much longer time. And that's what we saw after the Great Recession, was that it was many years before people at the lowest income levels were back to the place that they were before the recession. So this is probably going to be, we're probably going to need to provide support for people for an extended period of time, which is partly the reason that 1277 is so important, because it creates a permanent state rental assistance program. It's not just a one-time infusion of funds. And it's also why we need all of these other bills, because there just probably isn't going to be enough. We're not just going to be able to solve this with money. We're going to have to find other ways, to prevent people from losing their homes. So just cause protection and 5160, making sure that people have right to counsel, making sure that people have payment plans, all those things kind of work together with the rent assistance. And I think it's combined that we're going to be able to really stave off this potentially horrifying, outcome that could happen if we didn't do all those things.
As a follow-up, I want to ask this question, and Rob and I were chatting about this before we went live on Facebook, and that was when we talk about, rent, and we talk about things that perhaps are in arrears, and you mentioned, and this is that phrase you mentioned, Rachel, unsustainable funds, what people are doing to get by, from payday loans to selling, valuable items. Where does this kind of help and funding fall into things like utilities, internet, those types of things that people are having to make choices about now in order to keep themselves housed?
Mhm. Well, the rental assistance funds that are coming from the federal level can also cover utilities, including internet. And I think that we all know more than we've ever known before from 2020 that that's not an option. Having internet access, being connected, digitally is not a luxury. It's a critical way that we interact right now. I mean, kids are going to school on the internet, people are working, with the internet. It's not a luxury, it's not an option. And so it's great that the rental assistance funds will also support those things. The other thing, of course, is that if we provide people with, money to help pay their rent, it frees up some of their other funds to take care of those other basic needs. And I will also just highlight, since it's related, we're supporting a budget item that is being led by a group called the Equity and Education Coalition that would create a digital navigators program. And it's kind of coupled with funding for, in the capital budget, that is funding for creating more access to broadband, and essentially trying to close the digital divide for people in rural communities, for people of color, for low income people. And it's really, really important budget requests that they're making. I think it's $6 million that they're asking for in the state operating budget, and we're supporting that. So I'll stop with that.
Okay, yeah. So Laurie, that leads me to my next question, which now is kind of twofold. As you talk with clients who reach out to you for legal help, number one, what are you urging them to do right now? And then number two, are you having conversations about internet, utilities, food, those other things that are big connectors with the picture?
Yeah, we absolutely are. We're not here to just be lawyers. We can't do that because first of all, people who come to us don't just have one legal problem. We all the time are finding, okay, you're having trouble with housing, but really the issue is we got to get you out of a bad domestic violence situation, and then we can deal with that, or whatever. It's just so we're always talking about like more than one thing, because when people are on the margins, vulnerable, have barriers to pretty much to doing what they need to do in life to be okay, they just multiply. So one of the first things we do is just look for other kind of what's the order of stuff in which we have to address your issues so that we can really make something happen and get out of the situation. So that's part of it. Another thing we're trying to do because of what's happened in the pandemic is our clients don't, a lot of them don't have internet. They don't have, most people tend to have phones, but other than that, they don't have printers, they don't have computers, a lot of people don't have internet access. And plus our libraries are closed, which is where everybody used to go to get prepared for a hearing or to try to, get information about something. It's just not there anymore. So one of the things we're doing is providing access for people in our office. If they have to do a hearing, come in, we can make sure that you get on Zoom correctly and be represented and be okay. We now have a bunch of laptops that we can, roll out and give to people if they need to have that. So we're trying to, at least on our level for what we need to provide for people, give them that technology. It's actually, some of the things about the pandemic have had a silver lining, one of which is that our applications are now online, which means you don't have to go through our not so great phone system. And it's also, it's easier for people who may be in a dangerous kind of situation to do that rather than have to get on the phone. So it's becoming an even greater part of what we do. And as we get more into thinking about our basic issue that we're dealing with in housing justice is homeless prevention, and that it goes two ways. We've got people who are currently homeless, people we anticipate are going to become homeless who probably never would have if it hadn't been for the pandemic. We got to find ways to get them through the legal barriers that get them back into housing. And we have to work with people who are in housing now to keep them there. And it's just, so it's a lot, there are more legal issues there than we had previously been able to deal with. And now we are. So some of those things include like legal financial obligations that are in the background that keep people from being able to rent, that kind of thing. If 5160 passes, we don't have to worry about past evictions anymore. So that's a nice thing. But a lot of them are still out there. So it's getting bigger, broader, wider, and more specific at the same time.
Rob, what would you like to add to that?
So Laurie just mentioned 5160, and what I was going to ask is similar, ties into that. If 5160 can't pass, what kind of strategies are there that you use at Tacoma Pro Bono to help people get those evictions off of their records so that they can move forward into new housing without carrying that burden with them?
Yeah, so now what we can do is we can get what's called an order of limited dissemination, which is just, can you come up with a technical term that's hard to say, hard to remember? What it means is you've got an eviction on your record. It's sitting there in court records. Anybody can look it up. But when it comes to screening agencies who are going to look at your application to rent a place, if that order is there, they're not going to be able to see that past eviction. And we can do that right now. We can do that for anybody who has an eviction on their record. So one of the things we're doing in cooperation with the coalition is going out to talk to homeless people, currently homeless people, unhoused people, say, do you have an eviction on your record? Is it, keeping you from being housed? We can help you with that. We're just kind of beginning to get that rolling. We're very excited about it.
Thank you.
Great question, Rob. So Laurie, let's consider a timeline. Let's say that I'm a housing provider. I've reached out to you today to let you know that I plan to evict someone, or I plan to evict somebody once it's possible. How quickly could I do that?
So at that point, let's say it's June 1st, just kind of crossing our fingers that that's when you'd have the first opportunity to do it. So you have to give a 20-day notice currently if nothing else happens. It could, if you're in Tacoma, it's a 60-day notice, but let's say you're not. So 20 days, that's going to put it towards the end of June. And at that point, that notice expires and you could set an eviction hearing, and that would probably be, again, about another month. So you'd be looking end of July. The actual eviction probably wouldn't happen until August. So a couple of months. And that, there's so much stuff up in the air. Who knows? It could be longer because there could be so much, traffic in the courts that it would just take that much longer to get through. And then of course there could be a defense and you could lose. So.
Exactly. And as you mentioned, it's not just one issue. So there's many, many issues that you have to solve in order to even get to the point where you can talk about this in court. So Rob, I know you had a question about that as well.
Yeah. So Laurie, when people come to Tacoma Pro Bono, are they coming to you at a point where they're letting you know that I just received this communication and I think this might happen when the eviction moratorium is done? And then what kind of advice are you giving them at that point? With the reason that I ask this being that if you leave your housing preemptively because you don't want to face that eviction, you also trigger a number of other things, including a lack of the ability to get rental assistance.
Right. Yeah. People are really encouraging because often they want to help both sides, landlords and tenants, encouraging people to stay in their current situation. And that's actually, I think, from all our experience listening and talking to landlords and landlord attorneys, clients, everybody that we work with, that's probably in most cases what's going to happen. Is that I mean, most landlords don't like evicting people. They would rather get paid. They would rather keep people that they know are good tenants. I mean, it's not the same situation, but it is. If you're a landlord, I mean, why would you want to evict someone and then go through the whole process of trying to find someone in this shattered economy to rent your place? So, I mean, we think it's a good bet for people to, try to stay, get the rental assistance. If they think that their landlord is really going to evict them, then we just try to make sure that, please get back to us as soon as you get that notice, and we will help you. Again, if 5160 passes and they're low income, we will help them for sure. Remember, right now we are staffed up, so pretty much we can help everybody. The problem is when people don't come to us and they show up at the hearing. So, which was our normal modus operandi before. So we're good at that, but it's better if we have advance notice.
Laurie, that leads me to another question. Because of my work with the Center for Dialogue and Resolution, I know that the courts are really backed up right now. What are you seeing in terms of cases and wait time?
That's a good question, and not one I can probably answer too well. I know that a lot of cases are being continued because when the 60-day notice thing happens, there's a complaint process that goes through the Attorney General's office. It may come to court, and the judge takes a look at it and says, I don't think so. We're going to continue this and get more information, or we're going to make sure that the tenant gets a lawyer. So there's a lot of that going on. And just the difficulty of dealing with Zoom hearings is that's been an issue. Court is talking now about, are we going to stick with Zoom? Are we going to go back in person? Are we going to do some kind of hybrid model where we can do both? I have my personal feeling just from talking to people is there'll probably be some kind of a hybrid thing because that'll give more people access and yet still give people the opportunity to come in person, because that makes it a little bit easier to negotiate ahead of time with opposing counsel. So a lot of factors, but things are behind and they're going to get behinder.
Yeah,
I know that for sure.
And then you want to add COVID into the whole being in person issue here.
Right.
So Rachel, as Laurie was saying, if this bill passes, what is the best way for people to advocate to the governor and to their legislators to ensure that there are steps in place to create that off-ramp that we have been talking about from the moratorium?
There's lots of ways. And the first thing I'll say is it is incredibly important for people to contact their lawmakers. I think, and especially in this remote session, it is easier than ever and maybe more important than ever for constituents to weigh in. You can testify on a bill now without having to travel to the state capitol in Olympia. So there's a lot more opportunities for folks to weigh in. I would say the first thing I'd say is get on the list of an organization like ours, or if there's another advocacy group in your community, a local group that you want to follow. But we send out really regular email updates and make it super easy for folks to click a link and then personalize a letter that will be sent directly to their lawmakers. And you can sign up for our email list at our website, which is just WLIHA.org. And I'll drop that in the chat in a second. I'll also say that right now on our website, and I'll share the link for this as well, we have an action up that allows you to just put in your, there it is, I just dropped it, allows you to put in your address, it'll find your lawmakers, and you can add a personal note if you want to, or just send it as is. And this particular action is in support of 5160 and 1236 that we've talked about here. And again, you can customize that. It's really powerful if you customize your message and say, I'm a constituent and here's why this matters to me, and just say something about either your professional role in this, your personal experience. Lawmakers really, really pay attention to these. Even if you don't customize it, their legislative assistants are counting and telling them every day, we got 100 messages from people who care about the eviction moratorium. So those are really simple ways to make a difference. There's also the legislative hotline. You can just phone and leave one message for all your lawmakers with you don't even have to talk to the lawmakers or their assistants. You'll just leave a message with a receptionist who takes your message down and sends it off to them. So that 1-800 number is the legislative hotline. And then the last thing I'll add is if anyone has a personal story that you want to share about eviction, about struggles to pay rent during the pandemic, even just more broadly about why housing is so important for you and your family or the people you work with or your community, we would love to help you share that story in a way that is going to, help further efforts to prevent, evictions and address all of our community's housing needs. And, you can do that via a video. We're doing a little campaign right now to collect short video testimonials. You can do it in writing. If you're interested in providing testimony at a committee hearing, we can potentially work with you on that. So personal stories have a real impact. Legislators hear from lobbyists all day, every day, maybe a little bit less this year because it's remote. But those real true life stories about, how somebody's been impacted, especially right now by the pandemic, and if they're worried about losing their housing, those are the things that really stick with people. So in a second, again, I'll drop my email address and I'll drop our website address in it in the chat. And if anybody wants to reach out, we are happy to help figure out how and where to best share your personal story.
Oh, what a wonderful invitation. Thank you for that. So speaking of a story, we have Danny who just jumped in here, and this is the question, and I'll let Rachael or Laurie or both of you answer it. It says, I'm jumping in with a question about the legal limits in Washington-Pierce County area for rental rate increases now during the moratorium and after the moratorium is lifted. Are there rate increases for rental rates? Are there rental increase caps? Is there protection for low-income, long-term renters to fight tremendous rate increases going on in the area? Now, here's the personal story. My property company is being standoffish about lease renewals during this last year. So I am on a month-to-month agreement, and it is stressful daily. Great question. What are you thinking there, Miss Laurie?
It is a great question, and I've heard the same thing from a lot of people that is just stressful. What's going to happen? Is it, first of all, is it just going to jump up? I don't actually know the answer. I don't know if there's a cap. I don't know if there's a limit. Rachael might know.
Yeah, so the eviction moratorium does prohibit rent increases as well. So rents, is that what the question? Did I understand that right? Is that what the question's about?
Yeah.
So
for right now, it does.
Yeah,
and
so
it's afterwards, I think that's what people are scared of.
Yeah, so that is a reasonable concern. We don't have any rent control or rent stabilization in Washington. So landlords really can raise rents as much as they want and do, up to the point where they begin to worry that they're not going to be able to fill their unit. So there has been this pause on rent increases during the eviction moratorium. There was a bill, it was 5139, that we were really supportive of, but that is no longer, it died in the legislative process. It would have prevented any rent increases for 6 months after the expiration of the moratorium, and then put a cap on rent increases for another 6 months. So it was a very temporary sort of rent stabilization effort, which we thought was reasonable and fair and would give people a little bit of time to kind of get settled again and hopefully get back to work. But that bill did not advance, it died. I do believe that the sponsor of the bill, I've heard her say a few times that she's looking for other ways to continue to move that forward. Sometimes you can amend things onto other bills. I have not heard that there's any like strategy for that. So my expectation is that that's not going to resurface this legislative session, so that whenever the eviction moratorium ends, rents will be able to be increased again.
Yeah, I think that's true for some of the other tenant protections that were originally in 5160, and we just don't seem to be of a mind to go forward with a lot of that stuff, which is too bad.
Yeah.
Laurie, of the clients who are seeking help from you, do you have that question come up with people saying, well, once this is done and once I have fulfilled the obligation, is there any way of you writing in something that my rent won't go through the roof?
That is a good question, and we do get it. I think to a certain extent that can be part of what happens when people go into mediation, which is why it's really important to take advantage of the eviction resolution program.
Well said, well said. So my last question for both of you is, as we always close with this question, as Rob said, this is about hope. Where are you finding hope right now? And Laurie, I'll start with you.
Okay. Well, this is a weird one because it's kind of counterintuitive, but this whole period of time has, one of the things that's come out of it, it's like a long haul, but it also makes you realize that anytime things can change completely, your life can just go upside down in ways you never anticipated at all. And I'm seeing that as a sign of hope because it goes both ways. I mean, bad stuff can happen to you instantly, and good stuff that you never expected can happen too. And so that's, for some reason, I'm taking hope from that. Little stuff like our dog who we adopted last summer, who is wonderful. We found out he had a life-threatening infection, which we didn't expect. And a week later, he got treatment, and he's like a completely new dog. So it's like he was going to die, and now he's back. And it's that kind of stuff. It's just thinking, okay, whatever it is, this too shall pass. Maybe, I don't know, but I'm feeling it. I'm feeling like, okay, it's all right. I can handle the changes because some of it's going to be good stuff, and you better be doing what you want to do when those changes happen. You better be on track. You better be yourself the best you can be. So that's where I am.
Beautifully said. I'm so glad about your dog. Ah,
me too.
Rachel, where are you finding hope?
Yeah, lots of places. I mean, one really obvious place is in the progress that it seems like we're making to make some pretty big changes in the state legislature, and some big things potentially coming down from the federal level. It really feels like there's a possibility to not only address the immediate crisis, but to come out of this in a better place. And I haven't felt that certainly at the federal level for some time, and it really feels very real right now. Like we might be able to make some big changes in federal housing policy. On a more personal level, I think, like I kind of talked a little bit about this at the beginning. The sun coming out every day, there's more people that I know who are being vaccinated. The fact that it's March, and I'm kind of, on one hand, here we are again, I can't believe it's another year, but this year all the parks aren't going to close down, probably, right? The hiking trails aren't going to close down. Like, we know more. Spring is on the horizon and a vaccine is on the horizon. And I really do just sort of really deep in my soul feel like something is opening up. So that's hopeful for me.
And Mr. Huff, I would love to hear what gives you hope right now.
Well, I think there's a lot of hope just with the work that I know that so many people are doing Rachel and her coworkers, Laurie and the people who work with her, and the staff at MDC and similar organizations across the state who are really working hard to try to help people stay in their housing, stay healthy, get vaccinated, and come out the other side of this pandemic. I think there's a lot of reason to feel hope right now.
I love that. I want to say thank you to Rachel, Laurie, and Rob for being here with us tonight for Straight Talk. We'll be back next week on March 8th with an update about the challenges youth in our community have had with schooling since the stay-at-home order went into place almost a year ago. That was one of our higher rated shows that we did with some youth that were just at that point experiencing what it felt like to even try to obtain a laptop. So we're going to check back in and see how they're doing. And we certainly hope that you will join us. So please stay safe, and we will see you next week. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.